Welcome to The Explainer. So, let me ask you a question. Have you ever felt just completely exhausted by the constant, heavy pressure to be a better person? I mean, in our modern culture, even our personal growth can start to feel like this endless, draining to-do list. We're always striving, always pushing, but somehow never quite arriving. Well, today, we are unpacking a really fascinating message from Chris Myers of Dwell City Church that addresses this exact tension. He breaks down the ancient text of Philippians chapter 1 to explore what it actually means to be a healthy disciple without completely burning out in the process. We're going to look closely at the framework he extracts from this historical letter to understand how a simple shift in our mindset can completely transform the way we live. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is a quick roadmap for our explainer today. First, we'll cover the context of Paul in prison. Second, defining a healthy disciple. Third, trait 1, celebrating God's work. Fourth, trait 2, having confidence. And fifth, trait 3, continuing the work. As we go through this, you'll see exactly how these theological puzzle pieces fit together perfectly. All right, section 1, the context. Paul in prison. To really understand the application here, we have to ground ourselves in the reality of where these words actually came from. Tracing this history, there is a very real sequence of events. You know, it's so easy to view ancient text as just arbitrary words floating on a page somewhere, but history tells a tangible, physical story. After Jesus' ascension around the year 33, the church was born in Acts chapter 2. Eventually, a man named Paul gets saved and becomes a totally dedicated missionary. He travels all over the place, and on one of his journeys, he plants a church in a city called Philippi. And what's absolutely amazing here is that this became the very first European church ever to exist. And that brings us to the actual letter we're looking at today. Listen, Paul isn't writing this from a comfortable, air-conditioned office. He is writing this from a first-century Roman prison. But despite being locked up, his joy simply could not be chained. He's writing a deeply personal letter to that small church in Philippi because they gave sacrificially to support his mission to bring the gospel to Rome. He's thanking them, he's addressing their very real concerns about his imprisonment, and he's giving them a crucial update on Epaphroditus, who was a member of their church who actually got severely ill while delivering their financial gift to Paul. Moving on to section 2, defining a healthy disciple. So with that incredibly rich historical context in our back pocket, let's shift to the core modern application. How does a letter from a Roman prison define a healthy disciple for us today? As Myers points out, sitting in a church service or just reading a theological text can sometimes accidentally leave you feeling like you just aren't good enough. Like you always have to strive to do more, right? It's an exhausting, performance-based mindset where the focus is entirely on yourself and your own willpower. But the biblical model completely flips this upside down. A healthy disciple rests in what Jesus has already accomplished. Jesus paid it all. He did the heavy lifting. When you truly realize that, your attention naturally shifts off yourself and entirely onto him. So, the crucial point is that a healthy disciple is fundamentally a servant of God. When Paul opens his letter, he doesn't lead with his impressive title of apostle to flex his authority or demand respect. He just calls himself a servant. Adopting the identity of a willing servant radically shifts how we view our entire life circumstances. A servant submits their will to God's will. And honestly, that's exactly how Paul could sit in a dark, dirty prison cell, not as some victim whose plans were ruined, but as a servant who trusted he was exactly where God wanted him to be. All right, section 3, trait 1, celebrating God's work. This foundational idea of being a servant leads us directly into the first of 3 specific pillars that construct a healthy mindset. There is a stark, obvious difference in effort between these two cultures. Think about it for a second. Complaining is quick, it's incredibly easy, and it's cheap. Anyone can instantly voice a complaint about literally anything. But true celebration? That takes deliberate effort, planning, and work. Myers uses a really great analogy from our modern culture here. Hollywood's massive awards season. Between the Oscars, the Grammys, and the Tony Awards, hundreds of people, from the famous lead actors all the way to the behind-the-scenes costume designers, are intentionally recognized and celebrated for their hard work. Well, a healthy disciple applies that exact same intentionality to celebrating what God is doing in a church. To really ground this ancient text in modern reality, it helps to see how this plays out locally at Dwell City Church. Myers lists out exactly how their people are serving right now, and it's pretty incredible. They have 13 missionaries who took a 9-hour flight to serve church plants in Italy. They have community food distribution teams, set up and tear-down crews sweating it out every single week, hospitality teams, youth ministries, small group leaders, and worship musicians. People are consistently pouring into the lives of others day in and day out. A healthy disciple doesn't just shrug and take all this for granted. They actively recognize and celebrate this kind of ongoing, daily work as the very hand of God moving in their community. Which brings us to section 4. Trait 2. Having confidence. We are officially shifting the narrative from an outward celebration of others to an inward, completely unshakable trust. This brings us to an incredibly powerful verse from Philippians 1:6. Just look at the absolute certainty in Paul's words here. I am sure of this. But notice carefully where that confidence is actually placed. It wasn't placed in human willpower or even the Philippians' ability to just hold on to their faith really tight. It was placed entirely in God's sovereign control. God is the one who began the good work in them, and it is God who will sustain them and bring it to completion. But let's be real, living with that kind of confidence is really hard for us humans because, well, we crave control. Myers injects a fantastic, super relatable piece of humor to illustrate this. He talks about how kids will routinely walk right up to you at 11:30 in the morning and ask, "What's for dinner?" I mean, at 11:30 a.m., you're barely even thinking about lunch, let alone dinner. As adults, we do the exact same thing. We want a script for our entire lives just to feel secure. But God doesn't hand us the full script. He asks us to be servants, trusting that He is good and entirely in control, even when we don't have a clue what's coming next. And what happens when we place our supreme confidence in our own flawed abilities instead of God? Well, Myers shares this hilarious, almost cartoonish anecdote to explain it perfectly. During a 4th grade field day, there was this new kid at school who was loudly bragging about how he was going to easily win the big race. As they hit the final stretch, the new kid was incredibly confident. So confident that he literally turned his head back to gloat, yelled, "See a turkey," and immediately ran face first into a steel basketball pole. Ouch. Placing our absolute confidence in ourselves is just as dangerously blind. Our willpower is weak. True, unshakable confidence has to be placed reliably in God. That takes us to section 5, trait 3, continuing the work. Once we have that confident foundation built, we reach the final pillar. Let's look at how resting securely in God's completed work paradoxically frees us up to continue His earthly mission. And this brilliantly illustrates Paul's logical progression for how this work actually continues. Paul prays for their love to abound more and more. But catch this, real healthy love isn't just a blind blanket endorsement of everything. According to Paul, as love truly grows, it naturally produces deep knowledge and sharp discernment. This discernment is what then gives us the ability to approve what is genuinely excellent, godly, and pure. Our purity doesn't come from sheer isolated behavior modification. It comes from this deep, abiding connection to Jesus that sharpens our focus. When disciples rest in God's confidence and follow this progression of love and discernment, the mission naturally expands way beyond themselves. Myers actually uses his own church plant's history as undeniable proof of this. Dwell City didn't just magically appear as a massive organization overnight. It began with just 2 families dedicating themselves to prayer. That faithfully grew into a dedicated launch team, which eventually culminated in a thriving church planted in March 2025. They continued the work not out of some panicked, stressful striving, but by humbly participating in what God was already building. Which brings our narrative arc to a really beautiful resolution. As Myers summarizes it, through the power of Jesus, we are to continue the work of God. We do it with love, we do it with joy, we do it through prayer. We submit our will as servants, not because it's a heavy, miserable burden we're forced to carry, but because it is a joyful, active participation in a story that is so much bigger than ourselves. The mission of God continues, and the crazy part is, we actually get to be a part of it. So as we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with this final, incredibly important question to reflect on. Where are you placing your confidence today? Seriously, are you placing it in your own exhausting, never-ending striving to be perfect? Or are you resting securely in God's completed work, acting as a joyful servant? Because the answer to that question changes absolutely everything. Thank you so much for learning with us today, and we hope this leaves you inspired to dig even deeper.